Well, good morning. It is 7:15, September 21st, 2023. There's our Rocky having a sleep there. I don't know what you can see, so I'm moving the phone around. So you might get a glimpse of him. He's got his face buried in the covers there. Um, he's slowly recovering, I think, from his ordeal. He had kind of a rough week. I've seen I want to talk about this a little bit. I've seen a meme circulating on Facebook lately, and it has rainbows and stuff, and it says, good people don't go around harassing members of marginalized communities. Now, I don't know what's prompted it. Maybe this march for the children that's being put out or whatever in protest of children being exposed to graphic sexual things in school or something. I really don't know. I guess because I disagree with what's happening now in society with the rainbow crosswalks and the other gay paraphernalia being on display everywhere, and also the curriculum in the schools now being heavily sexualized. And also I disagree with teachers and school administrators going over parents' heads and not informing parents of what their children are doing, and even taking children for medical treatments and having children put on medications for, puberty blockers and hormonal things and so on. I disagree with all that, with that interference with parental authority on the part of the schools. The school administration or the school board administration taking it upon themselves to decide they know better what's good for the child than the parent does. I do take issue with that. So I guess they would count me amongst those who claim to be good people, while we harass members of the supposedly marginalized community. But all I can tell you is that I've noticed the two people I've seen among my friends who have posted this thing were both children back in the days when the homosexuals and people like that were actually actively persecuted. I, on the other hand, was a child too in the early years, but then I also was a young man. And I remember the sorts of things that went on with regard to that community and how they were mistreated, and they were mistreated. I caught flack because I took a stand against it. Because there were guys who used to do what was called queer hunting, where they would actively look for people they thought were homosexuals, and I'm sure they made a mistake sometimes because they figured they could tell to look, which you really can't, but I'm sure they thought that somebody was gay when they weren't, and so on. I'm sure that happened. But the thing is, they used to go after those people and beat them. And I used to say, leave them alone. They're not bothering you. Leave them alone. Let them live their lives. It's not a justifiable thing. To me, I'm not somebody who's against violence. I think sometimes violence is justifiable. And I have used violence myself in the past in certain situations, and I wouldn't hesitate to use it again in certain situations. I do believe there are situations that occur in this life where violence is the answer. But I don't think that somebody living differently than you, but not interfering with you in any direct way, is an excuse for violence. And that was my objection to what was happening back then. And so, again, I find that we go to sick extremes in our society. And what we've done is we've gone from one sick extreme to the other. But if you're a critical thinker, If you're a person who's capable of rational thought and to think critically and not just a follower of trends and not just a follower of the crowd, then you will recognize a sick extreme when you see it. And see, people like me, we recognized back in the old days what was happening was sick. People going out of their way to abuse other people, that was a sick thing. It doesn't matter that that guy wants to do sexual things with other men. It's none of my business. Now, there are scriptural things, of course. The scriptures condemn those practices, and we have to be aware of that. If you believe in God and you want to do right where God is concerned, then you can't endorse those practices. And you certainly can't practice them yourself if you happen to be somebody who has those sorts of inclinations. However, we're also not to hate, and we're not to unjustly hurt other people. We're not to unjustly hurt other people. And so, if people who have those kinds of inclinations, those kinds of desires, if people whose, I guess you could say, romantic inclinations and lustful inclinations, if their inclinations are directed to members of the same gender as themselves, as opposed to members of the opposite gender, that's really their business, and it's not for us to take it upon ourselves to punish them, to actively go out looking for them and to hurt them. That's not for us to do. In fact, when we do that, we are usurping God's authority. It's up to God to deal with all that stuff. However, plus the Bible also says that if a man looks at a woman with lust, or if a man fornicates with a woman, he's just as guilty. It doesn't differentiate. It doesn't say that a man who's laying with another man is worse than a man who's laying with a woman who isn't his wife, or a man who's wanting to lay with a woman, whether he's done it or not. Jesus said, if you think about it, you've done it. You're just as guilty as if you did it, if you're thinking about it. And so, see, I can tell you I've lusted after lots of women, So, I mean, in God's book, I'm just as bad as a homosexual. There's no differentiation. I'm just as big a sinner as any homosexual. And so what business do I have to take it upon myself to hurt a homosexual for being homosexual? And that was the reason I took a stand against that back in the day when I was a young man, and that was still happening. The two people I saw who posted these memes, they were both children back then. I knew them back then, and they were both children. I was old enough to actually know what was going on, and I actually took a stand against it, and I caught hell for taking a stand against it too. I was punished in various ways because I took a stand against it. Now I'm taking a stand against the opposite sick extreme, which is the continuous, basically beating us over the head with their sexuality, and also with the homosexual lifestyle, and also with what I'm seeing happening in the schools with the usurping of parental authority, and with the exposing of young children to graphic sexual things that they don't need to be exposed to and shouldn't be exposed to at that age. 6, 7, 8, 9, 10-year-olds don't need to know this stuff. And you can teach a child not to be a jerk and not to be a bully without corrupting them with graphic sexual imagery and so on. You can do that. You don't need to tell a child what a homosexual does with another homosexual and how they do it and so on. in order to teach a child not to persecute, abuse, or brutalize people for being different than them. You don't have to do that. There's another thing happening here. There's a whole other kind of sickness that's being applied in this modern society. And as a critical thinker, I see that, and that's what I'm objecting to. And look, I haven't had a lot of sex. I've mostly been rejected by women. I've had a little bit of sex, not a lot. But here's the thing. I would object if I had a child and my child came home and they started telling me, my little child, that the teacher was talking to them about the kinds of things that I have done with women and that I've wanted to do with women, with other women who I haven't been with. Women that I've had those thoughts about, but nothing's ever come of it. I would really be upset if my child came home and told me that the teacher instructed them as to how to engage in vaginal intercourse, or whatever. How a man has vaginal intercourse with a woman. That would bother me. I'd be down there at the school basically saying, what the hell? Who are you to tell my children that? And, so it's not a hate thing against homosexuals. It really isn't. I don't hate homosexuals. I don't have any feelings either way about anyone, as long as they're not bothering me. As long as they're not actively interfering with me, I don't think it's any of my business. I don't think it's any of my business what goes on between a man and his wife, or between two women, or between two men. I leave all that for the people involved and for God to sort out. And I recognize that even if they are sinning, well, I sin too. So who am I to take it upon myself to punish them? But here's the thing. I don't want children exposed to it. I don't want to continuously be beat over the head with propaganda, and I don't need to be. I never was somebody who abused these people. And so I don't need to mend my ways or whatever. I never participated in that back when it was fashionable to participate in it. And like I say, I did catch flack back then. I suffered for taking a stand against it. And now I suffer for taking a stand against what's happening now. But as a critical thinker,